great. Great. For the most of you I haven't met before, I'm really grateful that you took some time out of this beautiful Saturday late afternoon to come and talk about a vision of yoga for our time. I've been a practitioner and student of yoga, and still remain to be a student while also teacher of yoga for the last 10 years now. And I have to say that yoga is something that has become, as my teacher would say, you don't bring your life into your, you don't bring your yoga into your life, you bring your life into your yoga. And so that has been more the journey for me, as bringing more and more of my life into my yoga. Before, yoga was just this thing that I kind of did, and now it's more like it starts to consume more and more of my life. And actually that's a really beautiful thing, and I'm grateful to be able to share some of the ways in which yoga has impacted my life, the journey that I've had with yoga, and also in the process what I've started to observe about the trends of how yoga is being presented and practiced in the world. And then also as a teacher and teacher trainer, what I've come to see about teaching students yoga and training teachers to become those who impart this yoga knowledge and yoga tradition. And it's been a really eye-opening journey for me. About, I think it's 2016, I basically left everything in Vancouver, and someone had bought me a ticket to India, and she wanted me to go to a place called the Kumbh Mela, which is the largest gathering of yogis on the planet. Now, this is not just the largest gathering of yogis, it's the largest gathering on the planet. The Burning Man pales in comparison to the Kumbh Mela. Kumbh Mela is like the original Burning Man, okay? You're talking about 60 million people coming through this space of one city over the course of a month. And I'm talking a small city, I mean, smaller than like Coquitlam, it's just a small area. And going to the Kumbh Mela was a really eye-opening experience for me. The oldest records that reference this festival are thousands of years old. And in those records, they talk about this festival as something that has been going on since time immemorial. So who knows how old this festival is. And it follows the transition of the planet Jupiter, which is the guru's planet, or the teacher's planet. And so at this festival that occurs every 12 years, and then they have these smaller segments, like every 4 years they have one, and then every 12 years it's called a Maha Kumbh Mela. It gathers, yogis from all across the land of India that come and converge in one of these sacred rivers. And they share yoga, they do teachings and practices, and it's also a complete gong show as well. As you can imagine, 60 million people. India is already quite a mad place in some ways. So, you have the whole spectrum from saints to charlatans. But I felt called to go to the Kumbh Mela because I wanted to pilgrimage to this site, this experience, to connect with what is the essence and the heart of yoga. And I had some pretty profound experiences while I was there, talking to yogis, being around teachers, spending time walking through the streets, seeing the rituals and the ceremonies. And there's a poem that I want to share with you that came out of this time of being immersed in the Kumbh Mela. And this poem, I feel, kind of offers somewhat of a vision that we'll explore a bit more. So this poem is called Yogi's Call. Yogis of India, with each offering you call, remembering nature's spirit who nourishes and sustains us all. Meditating upon a kingdom vast, within and beyond the mind, hearts attuned to the Creator's song, dancing to the rhythm of cosmic time. You celebrate the secret for which the wise will die in life. Liberation from illusion's bondage, freed by the Lord's most holy knife. Magicians cast spells to show their power. Your purpose is to display something more, to give homage to our ancient past and reenact our sacred lore. Both rhyme and reason merge when your lips speak in sacred verse, reminding us of the sadhanas which bridge heaven with the earth. You teach how the elements of life are within our conscious control if we but yoke our minds to the knowledge of the soul. A code of conduct once ruled your sacred band of yogis, mystics, and sages who traveled India's holy lands. You moved as spiritual cells throughout the human race, bringing healing, energy, and secret knowledge transcending both time and space. O yogis of the past, wherefore art thou today, when the world is out of balance and seeks return to the sacred ways? We need your noble purpose, the sacrifice you incarnated to give, the symbol you embody of the enlightened life we came to live. Mat your locks with a braid of truth, echoing the Guru's message to the halls of time. Awaken, children, to the cosmic one. This entire play is the writ divine. So we'll kind of unpack that poem over the course of this talk. And I would like to, my intention for this masterclass series was only partially for me to share my views. The other part was for me to listen to your views, your thoughts of yoga, your experiences of yoga, how you see yoga emerging in the world today, concerns you have, inspiration that you have, and together allow us to explore this. So I want you to know my really sincere intent is to invite a model of inquiry. And I think this model of inquiry is so important. It's emerging stronger in the educational space in the world today. But know that in yoga's past, inquiry has been at the heart of the quest of truth, of the quest of real knowledge. You would sit at the foot of a teacher and you were not expected to just take everything that they say without asking questions, right? And it was through open-minded and sometimes fierce debate and heated debate and inquiry that we were able to arrive at something that was true, right? The Indian word for discipline is tapasya, and the root is tap, which means to burn, and that's when we create friction, right? And it's through this creation of friction that metal is able to be shaped and molded, and also in fire we burn out the impurities. So in the heat of inquiry, of truthful, sincere inquiry, we find what is pure and what is real. So that's sort of my hope, my intention for today, that we do that kind of inquiry. So what is yoga? I'm a fan of etymology, and the root of the word yoga is yuj, which means to yoke. And a beautiful metaphor is here with yoking. One might commonly think of just, the yoking of a plow to a bull to till a field. Very profound and important metaphor of yoking comes from the Bhagavad Gita in India, where Arjuna, who is a warrior, sits in a chariot that is driven by Krishna, who is an embodiment of the divine. And the symbology of this is the yoking of the carriage of the body, of the mind and the senses with the soul, so that the soul is consciously driving the vehicle, so that the soul is leading one throughout life. And this is what the promise and the power and intention of yoga is to bring the body, mind, and soul together as one. So that as we move through this life with this vehicle of the body and mind, it is being driven through the vision and the beauty and the possibility of the soul. And so that is, what I feel is the essence and the heart of what this yogic practice is about. It's the thing about yoga is that it's not a religion. Yoga is such a beautiful thing, but it's something that you have to do to experience its beauty. And that's what makes yoga at once very appealing, and on the other hand, something that is also challenging and discouraging if we're accustomed to just having the easy way out or to having things done for us. Religion is more of a deal and spirituality is a journey, right? So yoga is for the journeyers, for the people who are, I want to take a journey through this experience of life. through this inner experience of consciousness. I want to experience the union of body and soul in this life, not after I die, and the promise of that comes in the hereafter. And that's, the yogis have been those who are not satisfied by getting their piece of the pie, in the hereafter. I mean, they want to experience the whole cake while they're in the world. Right? And so yoga evolved as a series of practices and techniques, prayers, rituals, that help to establish communion with our divine self. And this exploration or unfolding of yoga over the years has taken so many different paths and so many different forms and modalities. When we're in a Western context or in the Western world, you kind of see yoga presented, as one stream with many flavors. You have yin yoga, yang yoga, hot yoga, beer yoga, weed yoga, goat yoga. I mean, there's just so many things out there, right? And in the Indian context, there were many different paths of yoga, not just different ways to move your body. And those paths of yoga were emerged out of sincere seekers who wanted to establish this communion with their divine self and to become one with the natural world. And in the process, they found a way that harmonized with their own inclinations. Some were more in devotional, some were more in scientific inquiry, some were more philosophical, others more service-oriented. And all these began to unfold these different paths of yoga, these different ways that people found to come into communion with themselves, with the divine and the world around them. And those paths of yoga are often not really discussed or taught today. Part of it has to do with very common case of amnesia. We generally not only forget, sort of who we are, but more where we've come from. And this kind of forgetfulness is prevalent all around us. When we come into the world, we have this assumption that this is the way it's always been, and that's not the case. And in the context of yoga, yoga has a very long history. And we often especially in the modern materialistic approach to yoga, don't really have the time or inclination to learn more about where did it come from, what's its language, what's its culture, what's its roots, because it can be, I think part of it is perhaps a kind of a laziness to have to go and learn all that, because yoga has been presented as a practice where you just come in and you want your body to feel good and you want to be relaxed. And it's very, very, very useful for that. But for people to learn the deeper cultural and spiritual aspects of yoga requires a different willingness. It requires a kind of a seeking heart and a seeking mind. And it also requires some contact with individuals or teachers or even texts that support them to learn that. And this is something that, while it's available, it's not widely thought of or encouraged, at least from what I've seen in the mainstream of yoga. In yoga teacher training, I had people come who wanted to learn to be yoga teachers, but they never heard of the 8 limbs of yoga or didn't know anything about yoga philosophy, but they've been practicing yoga for a number of years. And what that indicated to me is that you can practice yoga for many, many years without knowing much about the inner teachings of yoga, where it comes from, or its history and context. I feel that this is shortchanging practitioners of yoga, because as that poem, I hope, illustrated, is there was a profound and beautiful vision of what yoga is, where a yogi was like a white blood cell moving through the body and the immune system of society, bringing knowledge and healing and inspiration, connected to the understanding of the elements and nature and the deeper teachings of the ancients. And this is something that has always been at the root and the seed of what yoga is. some of the most celebrated spiritual teachers were yogis. Jesus was a yogi. Buddha was a yogi. Ramakrishna was a yogi. I mean, there's so many individuals who, we know today who used and engaged in the practices of yoga in order to bring forth the truth. And for us to remember, yoga has such a deep and profound spiritual heritage that we can draw upon. That being said, I think that what's happening today is that the growth of yoga is kind of a forerunner of the appreciation of indigenous ways of knowing. And when I say indigenous, I mean that it is connected to nature. It is connected to a world that is more subtle and more difficult to talk about. But there's a hunger and a yearning to connect to that. When we grow up and live in just a postmodern Western scientific dominated society, there isn't a language for the inner experience or for the subtle. When you approach yoga and start to learn about the language from which it arose, the Sanskrit language, it's mind-blowing. I mean, they have words for things that of subtlety of the inner world and of the natural world that is just not available and present in the English language. Right? And we find ways to translate it, but when you look at the language, you get a glimpse into the mind of these people. Thousands of years ago, how deeply they were connected to the inner world and to the subtlety of the world around them. And so as we are seeking to restore and reestablish that connection, these indigenous wisdom traditions are coming back with their practices and stories and language to help us reestablish and reconnect to that. And I think that yoga plays a very important role in this because it has become so widely embraced by the world. The other amazing thing about it is that it's a decentralized movement that is largely driven by women. Most of the spiritual renaissances and religious, growth in the world, it's all driven by men. But the yoga movement is being populated and driven by women. As a man in a yoga class or yoga teacher role, I'm always the minority in the room by a long shot, right? And, it's been, to be honest, partially an adjustment for me, because when I think of the great yogis that I have looked up to and learned from, most of them have been men, even in the Indian tradition. But we're seeing this amazing return and renaissance of the rise of the feminine. And this is, really beautifully embodied through yoga, because it's about connecting to the earth, connecting to ourselves, connecting to our bodies. And a lot of spiritual wisdom and feminine wisdom is coming through female yoga teachers. And I think this is, absolutely amazing. And I'm really grateful to see that. So everything is happening for a reason. I want to take a moment here just with what I've shared and just see if there's anything that has arisen for someone, if they have a comment or question, something they would like to ask or share. Of course, I have some other things I'd like to say, but I have a feeling that maybe if a question comes in, it'll be woven in the context of the answer. And if not, that's okay. But if you do, please type it in the box. Sorry, I didn't take a moment. I meant to introduce Kylan. Kylan, you can just say hello to everybody.
Hi, everyone. I'll be helping out to moderate the discussion. So if you do have any questions, I'll keep an eye on the chat. And if you can raise your hand, I would also be happy to put you on so that you can speak your question out loud.
Kylan is an amazing yoga teacher and has gone through a journey of connecting more to the tradition of yoga and finding ways to embody that and share that with integrity. So I thought it'd be great to have Kylan. I know she has lots to say and questions to ask as well. So thank you, Kylan, for doing that.
It is truly a wonderful discussion to be a part of. It's exciting for me. I had my whole world changed when, like you described, I had been practicing yoga on more of a surface level without diving deeper into the spiritual aspects of it in a way that was authentic. And after finding traditional yoga techniques and practices and philosophies, it really restructured my mind in a way that gave me so much clarity. So it's something I'm very passionate about. And like Zamir said, it is very much inquiry driven. So those questions, although it might be scary to ask, they're a part of our collective questioning. You're a part of us. And I can almost guarantee you that, some other people are sharing some similar thoughts and feelings. So feel free to be brave. Otherwise, we can kick it off ourselves. But yeah, please.
Yeah, you can always type in the box. In the meantime, in the introduction to the talk or the little write-up, I said I'd give a bit of a overview of how sort of modern yoga came to the West. And so I'll just share a little bit of that. And of course, my understanding, just like anybody's, is not a total, historical overview, like this is exactly how it happened, but it might provide some deeper, wider context for you. The first emissaries of yoga to the Western world were people like Swami Vivekananda, who came to the Parliament of World Religions, who came in the mid 1800s as a Hindu monk in orange garb, in a climate and place that had never seen a Hindu like this. And he spoke a message of brotherhood and unity to people. And he spoke of yoga as this inner science of self-realization, of expanding ourselves to include the cosmos. He was having conversations with, Nikola Tesla, like the great scientific minds of that time, from the perspective of Vedanta, and looking at how deeply the Vedic knowledge base had understood some of the profound scientific principles that are being discovered and shared by quantum physics today. Right? And so this was very, very interesting time for the knowledge of yoga to come out of India into the West. But it was a seed that was coming into a hardly fertile soil. Right? I mean, you can imagine 150 years ago what people's thoughts around, yoga was, and largely it was very Orientalist, for lack of a better word. It was kind of sensational and occult and kind of fanciful. And so it was not in any way what we see today. Another significant emissary of yoga was Paramahansa Yogananda, who came to the United States and started the Self-Realization Fellowship. And he taught Kriya Yoga, but he had a deep connection and understanding of the Christian tradition and almost the Christian mysteries and his connection with Jesus Christ. And he was able to relate to, the Christian mindset within the Western world. And he began to also really impart and impress upon people's mind this notion of one's individual relationship to God, that you could become God realized, that you could know God, that you could realize your own body and mind as part of and one with the kingdom of God, and expanding this notion of God and the divine. And that really impressed the hearts and minds of many people, where they got into contact with this vast vision of divinity that the Indian yogic culture, the Vedic culture has. So he played a huge role in that. And there's many other teachers that have come since, but I feel they made a very large impact. The way in which sort of modern postural yoga spread throughout the Western world was largely attributed to a man named T. Krishnamacharya. And he was a sincere student of yoga. He had studied the 6 different, branches of the Vedic knowledge system, one of which is yoga. Has spent time in the Himalayas, taught and in India, but he was teaching, he would say rajas, people who were, local kings, you might say. And they were of a warrior caste, a warrior mindset. They were very impressed and interested in the mastery and development of their physical body. And he noticed that they were not deeply interested in the philosophical and spiritual aspects of yoga. And that the only way to start getting them interested in it would be to give them a impressive physical experience. Right? And so he began to teach them the hatha yoga, right? But not even the full range of hatha yoga, but normally pretty much just the physical postures and the stretching and the breathing. And he actually developed a troupe of young men who traveled around India giving yoga demonstrations. And these yoga demonstrations were very impressive because they would perform these physical feats that got people interested in yoga again. To think about the context of a yogi in India, these were these rare, quite eccentric individuals who renounce society in order to go into pursuit of the divine or the pursuit of a certain branch of spiritual knowledge or a mastery over the natural world. Not many people are, predisposed to that. And these people were supported in India, but they didn't participate in the social life. So this idea of the widespreadness of, yoga practice is something that lots of people can do, started to become popularized as they saw this impressive physical practice. And this also came with the rise of physical culture in the West, right? Interest in developing the body and strength and weightlifting. And so these two forces kind of merged together. 2 of his most prominent students, B.K.S. Iyengar and Pattabhi Joyce, became sort of the proponents of this modern postural yoga to the Western world, and many people will know of them. Another woman who was very responsible for spreading yoga was Indra Devi. She was also a student of Krishnamacharya. She taught in South America and the United States and brought some of the different other aspects of yoga as well. So, for it to be known that yoga as it came out of India in the modern postural sense was something that was rooted in India, and it was impressed and developed there as it began to spread across the world. And that was a perfect gateway drug. Like, it was an opening point where people felt that this is something I could participate in because it doesn't require me necessarily to change my understanding of myself or of my beliefs or my spiritual orientation. It's simply a purely physical practice, which is not actually what hatha yoga is. It embraces other aspects of practice, of the breath, of mental or inner cultivation, of purifying the body. But this was the aspect of yoga that really started to take off, and these teachers helped to popularize it in the way that we see it in the world today. Do we have a question?
Yeah, we have a great question from Angel. She says, curious what your thoughts are on the appropriation of spirituality from other cultures in the West in the yoga world.
Can you give me an example?
Angel, would you like to give an example? Sweat lodge, yeah. So yeah, like Native American cultures, and there are some other traditions I've noticed as well that have been blended with yoga that are not necessarily Native American.
Yeah, I've never seen sweat lodges practiced with yoga. But if you're saying more just a general appropriation of other spiritual traditions in the West.
Like as an example, smudging is another thing that you might see, or the 4 directions. Like, these are all Native American examples, but yeah, sometimes ceremonial things that draw from multiple different traditions can also be blended with yoga classes. That's kind of a new age spirituality.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't know that. Um, well, I I have two ways when I look at something. One is from the perspective of the person who is doing it and practicing it. So how do they see it, and what's their intention? Um, if their intention is, well, I want to bring a sense of the sacred, and I don't have the tools or words or resources, from my culture. How do I find a place where where that place has created or cultivated these, and I can bring that sense of the sacred, and in that way I understand the intent. And I think that is it's a perfectly, legitimate intention to want to do that. And I think that part of the challenge of this time is that, this is, we're kind of in a new culture in many ways, whether it's Canadian culture or American culture. It's maybe a couple hundred years old compared to many of these other cultures that are thousands of years old. And a culture that has been primarily materialistic with little languaging and understanding of the spiritual or inner natural world. So, when we're looking for that, you'll look towards where are the people and places that have done that. What unfortunately happens often is you'll just take a little snippet of it that feels good or looks good, and then you'll say, okay, well, that must be it, and then you present it, right? And what happens is that either it's misrepresented, um, or they don't take the time to really learn about it, or it can, water it down. And again, one of the challenges of doing that is it might limit the person receiving it as well, where they think that, oh, this is native culture, or this is what a sweat lodge is about, or this is what a smudge is about, or this is what the four directions is. And they may never actually access the deeper wisdom of that culture. And I'm sure that happens in the native cultures just as it happens in the Indian culture with yoga. And that's unfortunate, and that's sort of a shortchanging. But I feel like um, there's a dialogue that needs to happen. In fact, I actually remember a sweat lodge I was in with a native elder. And I remember him very specifically saying, we were in the sweat lodge, and he was like, this is not yoga, this is not breath work, this is not da da da, almost as if, and I realized he must have had exposure experience to that kind of thing where people are doing that. And he made a very explicit statement being like, this is part of our culture and our tradition, But what was very interesting is he mentioned about the medicine men of his people who would go into nature and go into the mountains, and they would pray, and they would bring back knowledge from their meditation and their connection to the spirits, to the people. Exactly a yogi. In India, that's what a yogi go. They go to the Himalayas, or they go to a natural place and they meditate, and they pray, and they connect with the natural world, and they bring that knowledge back, right? And so you can see that this is, all the different cultures have that. They have those individuals who do that. I don't know if that answers your question at all.
Yes, it does. Yeah, that sparks a lot of thoughts for me too. That is a very juicy topic that I've thought a lot about recently too. And I think what you were saying before with the subtle world that becomes clearer as practices are done and as these realizations come is hard to speak about. It's hard to form words about that, but it is all the same, essentially the same truth, the same thing. And what's interesting about how history plays out, I find, is that different groups of people in the world sort of speak the same language and develop a bunch of perhaps puzzle pieces that all make up that image. But take a different part of the world like India, those puzzle pieces don't fit together in the same way than another puzzle piece fits, but it's the same image perhaps. I don't know if that analogy makes sense, but
Yeah.
it
Yeah. Yeah, you could end up getting a very mixed up image and the pieces just don't fit together. And I do think that's very important to know, which is, if you study a system to get to know it inside. Like for me, I've been very taken with the study of Buddhism and the Buddha Dharma, the Buddhist system of knowledge. And I, after studying that for a number of years, began to study the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali and realized, wow, there's a complete crossover there. Raja Yoga and Buddhism, the Eightfold Path and the Eight Limbs of Yoga. They don't overlay on each other like that, but the fundamental basis and principle of it is very powerful. And because I'd studied Buddhism for many years with a teacher, my approach to the Yoga Sutras and Raja Yoga was very much enriched and enhanced by that. Right? So I feel like if you really go into one system and you get to know it, it can help you see those similarities in puzzle pieces within another system. The danger can be when you overlay your preconceptions of one thing right onto another, right? You have to approach and respect something for what it is and how it is presented. But yeah, that being said, there are some really powerful crossovers within yoga. So for example, if you're studying Raja Yoga or Gyan Yoga or Hatha Yoga or Bhakti Yoga, you will find that this underlying culture and language within India has infused all these different paths of yoga. And that's what's powerful about the Indian yogic system, is that through the language and culture and the stories and the practices, it opens up a very beautiful and wide gate to be able to explore. And that's my heart's real yearning, is I want people to receive that so that they can really be like, receive the gift of what yoga is, not to be limited. It's not from a place of being critical of people. It's more, but wow, what could you learn and explore if you knew this or you were exposed to this? If you can pull up the image I sent you about the Blackfoot, I thought this was very interesting, and because I feel that yoga is an ancient form of human potential movement. It's sort of like the early human potential movement. In the yogic sense, you're cultivating your body and mind to yoke and unite with the spirit, and developing these inner faculties, also to help you arrive at the possibility of your true self and your authentic self, or what Maslow would call self-actualization. Maslow himself actually went to spend time with the Blackfoot people, the Blackfoot Nation. And it's said that his vision of the pyramid of self-actualization, or his hierarchy of needs, was modeled after a teepee image that they used, but they showed it differently. And within their teepee, self-actualization is at the bottom of the pyramid. And then there's community actualization, and then cultural perpetuity. And so what that means is that when individuals fulfill their peak potential or fulfill their purpose or their dharma, the work is, how do we support the whole community to be able to have that experience? How do we create a community to actualize? At the top of it is cultural perpetuity, which means, and this is the responsibility of the elders and the educational institutions, which is, how do we keep this culture that supports the actualization of the individual and community continuing? That's the languages and the songs and the stories and the dances and the ways of relating, the ceremonies. They arose out of this very sincere attempt to maintain a culture so that all beings could thrive and evolve. And that was this indigenous vision, or the First Nations perspective, why culture is so highly valued, because it creates and supports that. Maslow's pyramid there is based on the individual's needs, right? From safety, security, belonging, self-esteem, and then to self-actualization, right? And this is very important because the Western culture is so individualistically focused, that uh, one of the benefits of it is we've come to understand, what an individual needs in order to experience that self-actualization and talk about it. And I think Maslow's work is being more embraced by the world today. But what's interesting about Maslow is that he went to India later on in his life. And in India, he met these yogis and saints, individuals who'd gone beyond just the fulfillment of their own potential. They had experienced transcendence of their own individuality and dedicated their life in service to the upliftment and the well-being of not just their communities, but all of humanity. They transcended those boundaries of separateness. And witnessing that, he added another part to his pyramid, which he called self-transcendence, as being the rung after self-actualization. I thought that was a beautiful observation of Maslow and his, willingness to include it in his pyramid. I feel that yoga, as an individual practice, is very, very powerful in supporting our self-actualization. How is that? I used to, there's two ways. I used to be a program director for an organization called Teen Journey, and we led rites of passage for youth. And we would do a 10-day program where we took them out into nature, and they would sit around the campfire, they would sing, they would dance, they would communicate authentically. We would have talking and healing circles. They would do breath work. They would participate in different ceremonies. It was very powerful. By the end of those 10 days, those kids were almost unrecognizable to their parents. They were completely different from how they came in. They were flowering. They were enthusiastic. They were confident. They were open to love. And it was amazing to see just in 10 days what could happen for them. And from having that peak experience, it sort of changed the way in which they saw what was possible in their own life. And I think that's one of the great things that can happen through yoga, is that when you have these deep experiences of self, deep experiences of the cosmos, of the truths that are spoken of the yogis, of consciousness, of bliss, of naturalness, of the Tao, it changes something inside of you where you relate to your purpose and you relate to the world and the people in your life differently. I mean, of course, we have our habits and our patterns, but we become more aware of how these habits and patterns interfere with our ability to start living closer towards that peak experience. And yoga helps us to access that space. And it also provides the tools and practices that allow us to work on those other levels of the ladder. Right? And those other levels are our psychological needs, our physical needs. And yoga is all based on helping us to come to terms with and transcend the limitations of our physical and psychological predispositions or needs, and let go of those limitations so that we can move towards our self-actualized state. I find the more that I've studied, Western psychology, I'm starting to see how powerful yoga is as a tool and a practice to embody these things and to have a personal daily practice that allows us to rise up that pyramid and experience self-actualization. Where I feel there is a real amazing contribution from the West is in somatic psychotherapy, in transcendental psychology, I've just done a 1-year program and certified as a trainer of compassionate inquiry, which was developed by Dr. Gabor Mate. And doing this work with Dr. Gabor Mate over the last year has opened my eyes to what was missing in my yoga practice, which was how do I connect to the deeper emotional states, to the trauma I've experienced through the body? How do I relate to it compassionately? And how do I bring that to bear in terms of my interpersonal relationships? How do we deal with some of those uncomfortable thoughts and perceptions and beliefs for ourselves and with others? And yoga is almost sort of assumes that you're going to do that in the process, or that you have a guru that you're close to that helps you to do that work, which is not very common today, right? And so I feel that, you know, a sincere practitioner of yoga may also learn some of these other modalities to help them work together, because, you know, the deeper, higher teachings of yoga are more the level of the conscious mind to the super conscious mind. It's not going into the subconscious as well, but not so much into the basement, to the unconscious, which started to be explored by Freud and, you know, a lot of other Western psychologists. So I see this beautiful merging that's happening, and that is also part of, you know, what I see as a vision of yoga for our time, where these, you know, different psychological and somatic practices that are emerging in the Western world begin to, you know, dovetail and partner with the yogic practices that also allow for a very explicitly spiritual worldview of the soul, of God, of devotion, and of surrender. I mean, these are things that are often lacking from modern Western culture. But lacking that, the spark of aliveness of the spirit of one who is seeking to be in tune with God or in tune with the soul can be lacking. And so I feel like something beautiful can come together there, and that's been part of my inspiration. Is there some other questions from people who are listening to the call? Thoughts? Who are you? Do you have something? Are you a yoga teacher? What has been your experience in the classroom? Anything you would like to share?
I can prompt the group with a question. I was just curious. We're talking about synthesis, and you mentioned earlier about multiple styles of yoga in the West, and you gave us a bit of history of how it came here. And it's just prompted some curiosity. What are the styles of yoga that the group practices? And do you choose multiple styles? Do you go to different classes to get a little bit of everything, or do you choose one style or two styles? Any takers on that? I'm just curious. Angel says, I'm a yoga teacher and mostly hatha yoga.
Okay. Well, I will pick up this here because maybe some people came on because they just wanted to get a discount on the inner path deck, and, you know, they're Buddhists using yoga as a form of meditation. Oh, fantastic. Yes. I really like that. And that's where I feel that that's where yoga, Western yoga is going to go more towards, is understanding meditation. You know, meditation is where the journey of yoga like really starts to begin. In the Yoga Sutras, or those three final limbs of yoga, dharana, dhyana, and samadhi, which is concentration, contemplation, and deep absorption, then, you know, the healing powers of yoga, the inner knowledge, it all starts to awaken right within us, and we, it's very profound. And I hope that yoga leads more in that direction, so people can meditate. That would be amazing. That would be amazing. I created this inner path deck, and the intention behind it, it started when I did a yoga teacher training for Langara College. This summer it didn't happen because of COVID. Nothing happened because of COVID. But the previous year when I was teaching, I found that there wasn't a base of knowledge about a lot of this stuff for the students that came in. And some of them were almost a little bit kind of frustrated sometimes, being like, do I need to learn all these other things about yoga? Like, I just want to learn how to do adjustments or whatever it is. And not to disrespect that, but I realized that the priority level was somewhat lower. At the same time, many of the students were clearly on a journey of self-discovery and a journey of healing. And they would benefit so much from the philosophy and teachings of yoga, particularly for the 8 limbs of yoga. And so I developed this tool that has a wisdom booklet here, and then 26 art cards, you can see, of different yoga teachings. And all the cards have this symbology that speaks to sort of the inner intention of this yogic term or this concept. So there's the 16 terms from the 8 limbs of yoga, and then there's other terms that I thought would be really helpful for them to learn. And so I developed this tool over the course of 2 years, and it's just recently been published. And the intention is for people who are practitioners and seekers of yoga to have something that they can, in a creative way, in a way of beauty, draw a card either once a day in their practice or once a week, and they can contemplate on the image. There's a symbology reference inside, and then for each card there is both the Sanskrit of the term and the description of the Yoga Sutras, but also sort of like a translation in a freestyle on how this card can be understood and approached within the context of our life, and a practice for each of them. So the idea is that the card becomes sort of your yoga companion, and it supports you on this path of integrating the deeper teachings of yoga. And as someone who has been very interested in divination tools for many years, I found that by working with them in this organic way, I naturally integrated the knowledge, where all of a sudden I knew all 64 hexagrams of the I Ching, but I never sat down to memorize them. But just over the years of working with it, you just become familiar with them, and then you know the teachings in your life situation. So the idea with this is that, as you work with it, all of a sudden, way of beauty. So if you decide you want to get that, I've offered a 50% discount for anybody who came to attend the call. And the coupon code is Langara. Maybe you can type that in, Kylan. It's Langara. And you can get it from the website, themysticyogi.com. So themysticyogi.com, look at the inner path deck, and you can see when you go to checkout, you'll see, put in the coupon code and you'll get that. And then for those who want to go deeper into what we've explored today, I'm offering a retreat, and it's going to be a residential retreat in Coquitlam. It's in a really beautiful home that is backed out onto nature with forest trails and indoor and outdoor practice space. It's called Sadhana Squared. And sadhana is the Sanskrit word. Literally, it means a means of accomplishing something. But our sadhana is essentially our yoga practice. When someone would say, I'm going to do my sadhana. And that might involve physical postures. It may involve chanting or pranayam or self-inquiry for contemplation of the teachings. And so we're going to look at a wider sense of what sadhana is. How do we understand the three fundamental principles of sadhana in the Yoga Sutras? And how do we take them and apply them in our practice so that you get a sense of this is what a personal practice really looks and feels like with the support of yogic knowledge, right? And yogic practices. So if you've been doing yoga for a while or you're just starting, you feel like, okay, I want to really develop this ability to have a practice and a practice that unites me with the deeper intent of yoga, body, mind, and spirit, then you might be interested in this. I sent an image to you, Kylan. I don't know if you have it. You can go to my personal website, samirdanchi.com, or on the Mystic Yogi on Facebook, and it's called Sadhana Squared. And if you just go to the website, I've listed, sort of explained what it's about. And there's one in the 2 last weekends of August. So if this content interests you, I heartfully invite you to come and join and to explore. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here and for taking the time to inquire into what is yoga. And I really appreciate that. I think that's the most we can do at this time. As I was talking with Kylan before the call today, I was saying that so much of the responsibility is on the behalf of the, I don't like to say the word, but the customer or the consumer. Okay, we don't have the same bodies of organization, institutions that existed in India for a long time to keep the integrity of yoga. They don't. I mean, the Yoga Alliance is kind of a joke. I mean, I know this is being recorded and it's out there, but in the sense that it's not quite doing that work. So as people who are practitioners of yoga, for you to inquire and to say, what feels like this is yoga? And as you support those who are going deeper and offering things with integrity, you support them and you draw other people along with you. And then the other part of the work is for teachers to do more education themselves, and continuing education for teachers is very important. And my mission with the Mystic Yogi has been to particularly reach and empower teachers, because I feel that the more that teachers can deepen their knowledge and can learn more about yoga and up-level their practice, they become the voices and the beacons and the bastions of this beautiful practice. And so if you're a teacher on this call, or you're just listening later on, thank you for listening. And I hope that you are able to deepen your practice and give more and more of yourself to yoga, and allow yoga to give itself through you, to your students, the real heart and essence of what yoga is. And it's the dream.
Thank you so much, Samir. We all really appreciate your wisdom. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Was there anything else, or I think we're good to close here?
There's a lot of thank yous.
Okay, well, thank you. Saving your comments for the end then, but that's okay. I'm kind of used to it, doing teaching on Zoom now. We're not. It's different when you're in a room, and I'm really looking forward to that. I know Kylan is as well, and probably many of you, is to not take a class over the phone, and to be in a room with the teacher and with other students, and connect to yoga and connect your body, mind, and spirit together. So thank you for doing the work and for being here. And my wishes for you on your yogic path. I'm going to close with an affirmation that I use in my practice. And I invite you to imagine that you are also speaking these words in your own heart, for these words have truly influenced my life. The creative spirit of God flows in and through me. It illuminates my mind regenerates my body, inspires me with creative ideas, empowers me with constructive action, and easily and harmoniously arranges all of my circumstance. Every aspect of my life is now in divine order. May it be so, so it is. Namaste.